Can I check the back? Everybody okay at the back? All good? Morning. My name is Peter. I'm going to try and manage this lively bunch through discussion today. So we may run into time issues at the end, but I'll try and constrain it. We are going to discuss this idea that generative AI isn't really working. So Forbes came up with a controversial statement saying that 95%, and that's not us, by the way. That is not us. Yeah. This is the lively bunch I was referring to. Yeah, copyright issue. So Forbes came out with this analysis that 95% of AI pilots doesn't actually make it. It sort of dies there. So we're going to discuss that topic today. Over the next sort of 50 minutes, what I'm going to try and do is manage this lively bunch into 4 big buckets, which is we're going to think about value and how we create value. We're going to think a little bit about strategy and what that means and how we position ourselves for success. We're going to think about procurement, or how do you actually get these services and how you actually think about sourcing some of the different elements. And then there's a bucket for risk. Broadly speaking, 10 minutes for each of those, and we're going to sort of constrain it a little bit, but it'll be free-flowing, so not too constrained. So what I would like to do is then start the conversation off by letting us talk a little bit about strategy. And so the perspectives we represent on the panel, which is really interesting, is we have sort of smaller businesses, startup type, which is more smaller, more nimble. We have the oil tanker equivalent, so we've got Pepsi and BASF, who really have this big problem of how do you maneuver the oil tanker and the speedboat trying to help, right? So that's kind of the perspectives we're trying to paint. And so we'll make sure we cover that off. And then we've got Rob, who's got a really interesting perspective on how to manage stakeholders, which is an essential part of actually adopting the change and making sure it rattles through and actually is successful, but also a wealth of experience in acquiring and building AI capability. So that's really helpful as well. Does that make sense? Have I teed it up correctly? Are we good to go? So hold on. So Altaf, do you want to start us off with your perspective on what actually it takes to get this right? So from a PepsiCo perspective and some of the work you're exposed to and having been around for a bit with us now, what is your view and what's your perspective on strategy and how you might organize for success?
Sure, Peter. Great opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Nobody has said oil tanker before, but yeah, I'm probably representing oil tanker. So PepsiCo, huge, large. I think just a bit of a quick context. I think I have to do a quick introduction. 90 billion plus, 300,000 employees, 200 countries plus in terms of the presence, massive in scale. Now, the scale and the expansive nature of the business itself runs into structural and operating model issues as well. So just to bring this to life, right? I'll talk about a massive restructure that we went last year. I'll talk about the world that we were before the restructure and post-restructure. And I'll also bring the context to why it's relevant from an AI standpoint as well, right? Just to kind of make it more relevant for any other people from the various enterprises. Before restructure, we had multiple units creating digital assets or AI assets. We had a CIO team set up across different sectors, and you had sector CIOs for each of the sectors building digital assets. We had a central strategy and transformation team, which was again building priority digital capabilities and products. We also had a data team, which was reporting into a CFO, developing data products. We also had SAP transformation reporting into CFO again, rolling out SAP into some of our key markets. We also had a global business services unit, which was essentially a back office centralized capability, which was also driving productivity and creating digital products. What that led to is a huge amount of proliferation of digital products and AI. Why? Because the CEO said, we want to go and become digital. So huge amount of sprawl, lots of duplication. Just to give you a bit of a context, 100 plus digital products, 600 plus report creators, data duplication all over the place, Azure cost hitting through the roof, massive duplication and waste playing out in the company. We went through restructure last year, and the whole idea was to collapse all those units together. Why? Because confusing the business unit, if I'm a country GM and I want to kind of deploy a digital product, then I had many competing units wanting to kind of do things for me to a much more simpler structure that we went through. So the structure that we went through is we have now one executive vice president. She sort of has now large number of senior vice presidents reporting into her. And we've structured ourselves into 3 key buckets. The first bucket is a capability bucket. So that capabilities unit will develop capabilities. There's a transformation bucket which is responsible and aligned to the functions in shaping the demand for the functions. And then we have the sector deployment bucket where they will be responsible to take the capabilities, working with the transformation leads and deploying it in the sector. So very clear operating model, structural changes, people assigned, team assigned, all these capabilities before the restructure collapsed. And that's kind of given us a huge productivity gains as well, right? But what it's also giving us is a clear strategy. Where we want to put the focus, where our priority investments are going to go on, what are our big bets, how are we going to do global to local. It's very clear from a top-down centralized standpoint. How is it relevant from an AI standpoint, just to make sense of it, to Peter, to your question? We've centralized all of our AI capabilities in one team. We are calling it AI Platforms and Solution. So that team is responsible to develop all the AI capabilities. Now, you can get that consumed for a particular function, or you can get that deployed for a particular sector or a business unit. But it just simplifies. The key takeaway is structural changes and operating model, right, is important along with your strategy to be able to drive that for a bigger scale like PepsiCo.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So Kate amongst us actually knows what she's doing. She can actually build this stuff in real life, so a bit of an anomaly amongst this group. So in terms of what Altaf has explained and his structures and explaining capability and consolidating, which one of those things are helping you to make your life easier because you're in the trenches actually building it, and which ones just creates a ton of paperwork?
I think it's a pretty tricky question to ask. Yeah, so definitely maybe about myself a little bit. I do have 4 technical degrees in the field of mathematics, statistics, applied statistics, and data science, and I actually represent not the business side today, but the technical side, and how is that done in the R&D programs properly. So pretty much it doesn't really matter how you call that. You can call that Gen AI, you can call that machine learning, you can call that artificial intelligence, you can call that statistics, deep learning, mathematical models, probability theories, doesn't really matter. So I think the kind of scientific perspective on that, and that's the statement that I was thinking about a lot, that right now, all of us, we want to do artificial intelligence, yeah? And that we go ahead on the market and hire a dose of data scientists and AI engineers. But the reality that we have today is that we still live in the world that is full of spreadsheets and Excels. It's not a data warehouse or something that we want to have, yeah? The data is a mess, or we have no data. We also have these kind of situations. The pipelines are not in there. Leadership doesn't really understand what they want to do, what they are also doing, yeah? And in this kind of reality, what I want to say is that fancy artificial intelligence will not help you. Hiring fancy data scientists will not help you. Only a proper technical foundation will.
Brilliant.
I hope that answered.
No, that definitely does. So what I'm reading into that is we want to be at level 5 in the maturity scale, but we've got to get through 1 and 2 first. And so getting the blocks right and doing practical things, which might be the priorities you've identified, is actually a way to start and focus on some real practical gains. That makes sense. Anything you want to add to that? Build on that? Sounds like you were enjoying that thread.
I think the 2 learned colleagues on my left have just made me feel highly inadequate. And at the end of the day, I'm probably an imposter here. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I have lived and breathed my life in the tech space. So I've never been fearful of technology. but if you ask me to code it, I defer to other people who are much better. The one thing that I've kind of recognized in this transition, and I think it feels very much like a transition, is that there is a huge tension between the technical people who are building these tools and the people who are running businesses. And the reason that tension exists is, I think we're coming, I know this is, I'm sorry, I'm going to go rather deep here. I think we're almost coming to the end of the usefulness of the capitalist model. And when you look at organizational structures that are largely militaristic, top-down models that span geographies and are very cumbersome, you realize that they've all been stuck together with like Band-Aid. And going back to the data is often outsourced to SaaS companies that promise to look after it, but don't actually get you a lot of access to the data that you yourselves are creating inside the organization. And what strikes me is the organizational structures are in some cases very much acting against the adoption of tools which have largely met the public through chat interfaces, which are very personal. So, in the company that I work for is an umbrella across a collection of companies, but we work largely with enterprises. And the enterprise fix for Gen AI is to roll out Copilot, largely. It's like, now we've done it, it's fine. And of course, so much can go wrong there, and it has, I think, in many cases. Some of the data that we found inside the organization proves that we give everyone Copilot, but they all use ChatGPT. I mean, the numbers are staggering, but that's largely because it's nicer, they're used to it, and they like to buck the enterprise system. And at the same time, we are a very highly secure business because we're dealing with corporate data that is really critical. And so the security policies that we have inside the organization is, to some extent, are almost the polar opposite of what we're thinking about doing with artificial intelligence, where we're effectively using large language models where all the data belongs to somebody else. So I think that these pressures on the institutional nature of the enterprise is up for grabs. And then the other thing I'm particularly passionate about is what I'm calling stakeholder science. And this is largely because every business or institution has stakeholders, and we think of them often as the people who are working there, or maybe the investors, the financial stakeholders. I would argue now we're in a position, because data can be manipulated and explored so much more easily and cheaply than ever before, that we can now look at stakeholders as being everyone that we could possibly trade with or connect with. Like prospects are now stakeholders in waiting. And if you start to get your head around that concept and how it would be possible, therefore, to create different conversations and different cadence in those conversations with the people who are part of those stakeholders, I think we could create a much more nuanced and interesting and inclusive relationship, and one ultimately which is going to be more trustable, which I think is equally critical.
Brilliant, thank you. I've made a few notes, I'll recap. Hayk, anything you want to add to that, having listened to the old tankers?
It's very hard to No, but okay, so I'll just say my background. So I come from both behavioral science background and AI, so I've been advising in both. That just to set the context. I'm not going to recap a lot, but I want to basically say that there is a growing kind of a chasm between technology and, let's just call it, humanity. And I just want to illustrate this. So any of you has a Visa credit card, raise your hand. A lot of you. How many of you know who is the founder of Visa? I bet none. Let alone, do you know where is it even headquartered? Yeah, but where? Everyone knows where Apple is headquartered, right? Yeah, so there is a reason for that, because Visa was, and Visa is, by the way, just a bit of a sidetrack, but Visa is the reason that credit cards are mainstream, don't even exist. Visa was not the first one, Diners Club was the first one, but Visa was built, and you can go on Google after this, who is the founder of Visa and how it mainstreamed credit cards. And how it did in a short is basically because the guy who did this, his name is D. Hook. You've never heard of him. And he basically was inspired and implemented initially and started Visa on principles of self-organization. He was inspired by biology and evolution. And he did a manifesto, launched Visa in 1968 after Diners Club. It grew very fast. It mainstreamed MasterCard, which came around the same time, and Diners, which was already there. And it turned Visa into what we know until literally after that. In '84, he went to a farm and retired, etc. But the point here is that some of the largest companies that you know were inspired and grew based on principles of self-organization and evolution. Now, why is this important in this context of AI? Is because, as I think the panel here, basically the others mentioned so rightly, there is a growing chasm of people who are very mathematically focused, as Kate said, doing an AI, but there isn't much of a, because AI is what, guys? It's at the end of the day, it's for people, right? It's for humans. I always joke saying, if you're using something for humans, you have to have human science in it, right? Doesn't matter what it is. You're interacting with humans using AI, etc. You have to have human science as a foundation of AI. If you don't have it, 99% of current AI systems don't, then you're going to end up with things what you call hallucinations, lies, falsifications, problems, risks, and Peter is going to highlight some of those and help us flesh out some of those. But my pitch here, and what I'm going to talk a lot more about, how do you bring human sciences, behavioral sciences, neurosciences, etc., to bear on top of, not on top, at the bottom of AI, not on top, at the bottom. AI is basically a tech. It has to be based on science. It has to have a DNA of human science. If it's not, then you end up with a lot of problems, which you all know about. That's my pitch. And I kind of bridge the two worlds, so I'm going to probably speak more from that angle, both in terms of large organizations, the tankers, as on that side of the team represents, and also from the startup perspective, which I represent here. Brilliant. Thank you.
I did issue the health warning, spicy crowd. They are going to go for this. So just to summarize the key point around strategy, and there's a lot of good builds in there, but effectively what I've heard is that generative AI needs to be properly governed in its adoption, because that has implications for larger businesses. And one of the things that came out is this idea of building capability. And capability isn't necessarily technology. Technology is part of capability. So you need to cover people, process, and technology, obviously. And then there's a huge element of decentralized deployment, so making sure this gets accessible, gets used to the business lines. The final piece that I think you touched on was this idea that big companies deploy, or companies deploy ChatGPT and they go, done now. But actually, in the pre-conversations I've had with Altaf and a few others, is that actually is personal productivity. That makes me personally more productive, because I can use that tool for myself. So what we're going to move into a bit more in the value conversation is actually, how do I scale that to a team? And how do I scale that to entire business? So the capability that's within ChatGPT as a consumer for £20 a month, or whatever that number is at the moment, that's great. But how do I scale that up? Because if we all have different ways of doing things and we're individually productive, we might actually de-optimize the system as a whole. So it'd be interesting to know also some of the things that you've come up with and some of the attempts that you've had in doing this and actually tackling that problem, because personal productivity is a gain. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And so how do we go beyond that? I guess that's the bigger problem, and some of the stakeholder science comes into that. How do you go beyond just me being more efficient at producing spreadsheets and reading stuff and synthesizing my own data, basically? I'm going to kick you off on that one.
Yeah, sure. So when we, as you said, right, Peter, I think I feel that a dual speed approach is very important, right? So what I mean by that, there are a lot of companies which are sort of just taking the existing processes and trying to see how to kind of plug an AI into it. So that's one approach. Now, when you look at existing processes, whether, hey, I have a developer, how I can give GitHub Copilot to him or her and get him to become productive, or Copilot. We've also got Power BI Copilot, which is what our visualization engineers are using so that they can get instantaneous insights and dashboards created, right? So there's a clear augmentation, which is a horizontal augmenting human in their work on a day-to-day basis. But the real, I think, potential is when you kind of think about creating net new capabilities, right? Where you kind of reimagine. Just to bring that to life, I'll give an example as well. I hope this is working, or maybe I don't know. So just to bring that to life. So I'm part of data analytics and AI team. My team produces huge amount of analytics and business intelligence data products for the organization, right? So we sort of go into different functions and we help each of the functions and the various personas in it to make decisions, right, on what they have to do. If I were to kind of talk about the total number of reports that we have in our organization, it's a very simple business model. It is make, move, and sell. So not regulated. But the make, move, and sell needs to happen really quick because we have to catch the market, we have to drive the share, we have to be very quick and agile as well. What's that resulted in is in 40,000 reports, right? We have 40,000 reports in one company. We've managed to rationalize that, bring it down to 10,000, which is great. Remove, delete, low consumption, just get rid of it. So we've done that. Now what next? And we've also unlocked huge amount of productivity on the back of it, right? So because you kind of get rid of all the data pipelines, all the infra assets, all the report creators and whatnot associated. I mean, we're talking about report creators now moving into doing more value-added work. So the thing is, we are now reimagining those 10,000 reports into 50 AI-powered consoles. So we're saying they're going to be agentic in nature, they're going to be personalized. You'll have the ability to only feed in governed data sets, so it's trusted. And we've kind of visualized this in a way to say it becomes one single central place where people will come. And depending upon who you are as a persona, you'll get the insights on what you need to know. It will be conversational in nature, so you can ask the question. You don't need to trawl through 50, 100, 500 dashboards for you to know what you need to know. And you can even plug in all the ML models and data science capabilities into it for you to be able to have prediction, forecasting, whatnot. We've done this now with 3 use cases. Small scale, proven on smaller data models, right? Up and running, live, used by the users as well. We are now thinking about turning this into 50 AI-powered consoles for, let's say, the GM, right? Let's say a CCO or a chief supply chain officer. And that's the roadmap that we're looking at. So the point I'm trying to make is, I think one is what you would want to do incrementally, but the other is if you were to just reimagine a net new capability that you want to introduce, then you're creating a differentiator, competitive advantage. Otherwise, you're just a commodity because everyone else will catch up and everyone else will do what they can do with Copilot and GitHub and whatnot. So I think that's how I kind of look at the value proposition.
So if I can summarize that, let's avoid building faster horses and reimagine what's possible. And then start from that and reframe the problem effectively. And then start with, I would imagine, value creation for specific use cases for specific stakeholder groups, and then build out from that. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is where just a bit of a rethink, you need someone to build a vision, right? So I have a boss who is very, very keen on this 50 AI-powered consoles. And he's selling that idea. But he is very strong about the fact that AI can enable that. And so now the whole focus has gone into how we make that happen. So I think that top-down sponsorship, a clear vision, thinking beyond, what's happening now, stopping just tinkering and tweaking to kind of completely rethinking your processes end to end is where the value is going to be. Because then you're looking at productivity. Just in the example that I've shared, time to insight shoots up. Like we have business analysts crunching an insights report for a CEO of a business unit, taking 2 weeks. Now on the back of a data refresh, that insight summary is instantaneous. What does that mean for all the report creators? What does that mean for all the insight generators? I mean, I think there are implications which we have to think about and kind of look at. But is the potential really real? And would that then change the way we are doing things? Absolutely.
Brilliant. So if I switch to Hayk for a moment, so this idea, the framing, and I'll come back to it in a moment, okay. So this idea of framing that problem in the way that Altaf has done, which is we focus on key use cases, we understand what we want to achieve, you're a bit more of a speedboat. You can go quickly and figure out how this technology works a lot faster, potentially. You can come up with new ideas. How do you present yourself to someone like Altaf to say, well, actually, I can add value and engage them with their vision to make sure it's real as opposed to them falling asleep? How would you do that as a small company wanting to partner up or being able to kind of make available what you have to offer, I guess, as a USP to a larger company?
Yeah, thanks. And I think the contrast is going to be obvious. Yeah, so, I mean, again, for the context, I run a company, customer intelligence company, that actually works with banks and insurance companies. It's outside of Asia. It's out of Asia. We do approach banks and insurance companies. We offer basically customer profiling and intelligence capabilities. And the way we pitch this, I mean, obviously, I just said about psychology and neuroscience and stuff. I mean, we pitch using that as well. But the bigger proposition here is that there's a confluence of AI and human sciences, and we come with a proposition that sounds like a value for them. We obviously try and identify the problem first, or what they think is a problem. We try to validate that. And then we say, well, here you go. You guys are the tanker. You're moving very strongly, but you're not moving as fast. We have seen this already being validated, or we validated it. And here is the potential value buckets for you, right? So for example, just to give a concrete example, otherwise you're all gonna fall asleep. So let's say banks I'm just gonna speak for Asia, right? The banks in Asia, and most developing countries, I would generalize here, have hard time because most of the countries, places like Indonesia, Philippines, India, etc., these countries are mostly 70 to 80% unbanked people. So banks have hard time working with them because they don't have financial data. So here we go, and we come in and say, hey, how about forget about financial data. You want to assess someone's credit risk? Here's the way to do this. Of course, it has AI or ML, etc., because that's the keywords or buzzwords they look for in vendors or in startups they want to potentially work with. But here is even better. This is not just AI. This is science-based technology. This is literally the words I use. We converted science into tech. What science? This is the question I get. Behavioral science. What is that? Psychology, evolutionary or cognitive, neuroscience. Oh, okay. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. It's a blind spot for them. We educate them or evangelize, whatever the word that's non-threatening. And we basically say, don't have to buy into us based on our word. Why don't we test? Let's define what success looks like or value looks like, as Altaf said, from your point of view, from a bank's point of view, from insurance point of view. They say, this is what the value looks like. And then we provide testing capabilities, just like again Altaf said. We have to test, they have to test, the tanker has to test the speedboat's capability. We define what success looks like for them. It's their success, not our success. Their success, and once that's validated, then they feel confident, they think this is new and shiny and good, but now they also have the proof that this new and shiny thing is actually something potentially valuable, because no one really cares, and large organizations, the least of all, they don't care about shiny things in themselves. They care about that becoming eventually or translating into shareholder or stakeholder value or value for the company. So that's kind of, again, what I said is common sense, but that's kind of how we approach this, right?
Brilliant. So that's good from a vendor point of view. So, Kate, I know you do some really interesting work with universities as your source of innovation and kind of seeing what's coming next. How do you go about that? Given the frame of we have capability, we have use cases, clearly identified problems, we have some vendors that might be able to help us in that space. How do you go about it from a university? How do you engage? You sort of have a broad remit in terms of how you do that. Would you elaborate on that in context of that problem space?
Yeah, definitely. So I do have quite a lot of experience with having collaborations with the different universities. So it is not only in Germany, because I'm coming from Germany today, yes. It is North America, Latin America, Europe, it's also Asia. And I will go pretty technical about this question. So pretty much intentionally, like these collaborations, these, at least for me, I'm a technical person, it is not about taking, let's say, into consideration business perspective. We need to understand that artificial intelligence is the optimization problem. So as you said, right, Hayk, so it's built on math. So it has to be the hardcore stuff. And if you want to try out anything which is related in the data science perspective, it's got to be based on what do you want to optimize. And usually it is the first question, what do you want to achieve with that? And it might sound pretty silly, But when I do ask the company, what do you want to do with this fancy Gen AI? Usually the question is, well, I don't know, we got to think about that. Yeah, that's really unfortunate, and really unfortunate that this kind of term became a buzzword. It became a tool of marketing, and it became a tool of a PR strategy for the companies. And coming back to the collaborations with the universities. So if you do have a question, I want to optimize my sales strategy. I want to optimize how the term model is working for the marketing perspectives, that we can do this. And that pretty much the collaboration is working in the way that we're having the contract with the PhD students or the master's degree students, and we're writing that as a proper research. So they gotta understand what has been created on the market, what is currently on the research perspectives. We need to really search the entire field. Let's say that we're going to talk about the deep learning models. And we really need to understand what is it in there right now and what has been developed like 20 years ago. And it's not just like we randomly pick something from there. You really need to do it properly. So what has been developed 20 years ago, why have we developed something new today? What is the difference mathematically in there? What is the difference like in the different loss functions and the mathematical function that we had to create a new deep learning algorithm for us to solve the current problems today? So that's going to be the next stage. And the third stage is pretty much with every university project, we create sort of a sandbox where you can properly test the data, the concept, the objective that you want to optimize. And yeah, and that the closed circle is going to be, we go back to the business partners and we're asking, does it make sense? Because I hope this a common sense for everyone, but math is not objective, actually, even though that is based on the formulas. It can easily tell you that you gotta fire 100 people and that you have 0 people in the company, but you have money in the company. Yeah, that's the thing that you have with that. And therefore, we have to include the business partners, the people that actually understand what is happening with that specific business side in order to guide us, in order to assist us, in order to make the mathematical equations and their work for you and not against you. So
brilliant. So paraphrasing, having a problem well framed is a problem half solved, because everything else then becomes effectively trying to solve that problem. In your world, what you take is the well-formulated problem statement with the clear articulation of returns on that, and then check for feasibility and making sure you understand which of the building blocks you have access to, whether it's universities, vendors, best actually solve for that problem, because then you can link up, you can causally link the inputs and the outputs to an outcome.
Yep, definitely.
Brilliant. So we are moving into sourcing a little bit. So we've tackled the first 2 buckets, which is value. We thought about strategy. We're going to look at sourcing strategy, and some of what we've already covered is sourcing strategy. So Rod, I'd like to go to you, and having this, you label yourself as the AI Czar, which means you're very old. You've done this for a really long time, at least in my mind. What is your experience of, what a success looks like? What's the best you've seen going from pilot to full implementation? What were the sort of characteristics of that? What, broadly speaking, how could you frame that?
Gosh, I think I would like to have a full disclaimer on the job title, which I was anointed an AI czar, and most czars from history don't end well. I think anybody who talks about Gen AI as though they're an expert in it is lying, because it's evolving so rapidly. Half of my job is to try and keep up with what's happening every day. And my favorite analogy for that is it's like trying to catch Niagara Falls in a teaspoon. It's really hard to keep up with what is possible from a technological perspective, at the same time trying to frame it in a business context so it could be deployed. I mean, taking some of the points which were made earlier, I think I'm a great fan of zero-based thinking, where essentially you take the inputs and the outputs of an organization, and you say, let's imagine that we have none of the appendages, none of the staff, none of the infrastructure, and we start again. to build that with the tools that are now in existence. And I'm not suggesting that you fire everybody, although, by the way, that's another point. I think a lot of people in white-collar jobs are going to go, and I feel very, I think we should have that conversation, but I think it's going on another panel session downstairs. But I think zero-based thinking is a great framework where you can see how it could be rather than how it is. And it's a bit like going back to doing transformation back in the birth of the internet. You know, people do a lot of flip charts in those days, or whiteboards or stuff. We're trying to put workflows in some kind of context. And there was a great book that came out at the time called Bullshit Jobs. And if you haven't read it, you should definitely read it. But essentially, the concept is that a lot of work is bonkers. We do things, essentially lots of middle-class people get nice incomes and nice way of spending their life, but it doesn't actually move the boat forward particularly well. And so I think that is going to be more and more important as we've suddenly been empowered. You know, everyone talks about the immigration crisis, and yet we've had 16 billion PhDs just pop up in our pockets, or whatever the actual numbers of use cases are in the UK. I mean, it is a fundamental and massive transformation that's taking place in the world, and it's going to take some time to take that kind of change through an organization, because organizations are slow. They're on. I mean, talk to any CEO. The middle E stands for executive. I've yet to meet an executive who actually executes. They talk a lot about execution, but they have teams, and operations people don't always do operations. It just takes so long. It's more of a dream than a reality. So going back to where I think the rubber hits the road in a kind of more straightforward way, I believe that huge transformation is always difficult, and I no longer think it's necessary. What is so extraordinary, and I've been playing, one of my colleagues on the front row here, we've been both immersed in vibe coding. Vibe coding is a way to write ridiculously unscalable products and watch them fall over. But what you can do is you can explore the viability of making small changes to an organization chunk by chunk. So we've got chat interfaces helping empower people. These are going to start empowering little organizational shifts, which I think are going to be more likely than a massive transformation. And I would encourage anyone to look at those and explore them with the people that ultimately are going to benefit from them.
So effectively expose people to the technology to help tease out some of the ideas, which could then be scaled and validated and make part of larger use cases. Brilliant. So we've been given the 5-minute warning, and we're only halfway through, so we'll try and wrap this up quickly, just as a heads up. So Hayk, in terms of your experience and how we get the stuff actually done in the real world and helping some of the larger companies, if we move over to sort of take the sourcing lens, but move over to risks instead of say, what's the sourcing approach? How do you help people who want to actually adopt this technology, and what do you sort of educate them to some extent on the risk side? Because it's got of a dual-edged thing when you do. You're going to help them deliver their use case, but at the same time, you're actually educating a little bit to say, look, you need to think about these things. You need to be concerned about these. It's not just I'll satisfy your specification. How do you go about it? What are your experiences in that space?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this panel is about Gen AI, but we can only sporadically touch on it. I think a lot of the cases that we do get asked the question if we have LLM or Gen AI, etc., which we do. And I think the part of the education, as you said, Peter, the idea is that to educate that, number one, LLMs are not a panacea. This is not a solution for everything. It's a shiny new thing. And I think it's important I mentioned that LLMs are mathematical induction-based next word prediction. I think you should all know it if you don't. It predicts what's the most probable next word in a sentence in English originally, and then one after that, and the one after that. If you think of it that way, and you iterate on it in a way that it's really optimal, to use Kate's word, yes, you'll get a plausible sounding response to your query on ChatGPT, but the idea is that even making sense? Does it have context, common sense or not? Not necessarily. Also, I think important to mention on LLM, and I'll come back to kind of zooming out and answering your question, is that now, you probably all know, but just in case, Anthropic did a study, so one of the bigger LLM providers did a study that found out that LLMs now, and not just theirs, but all the main ones, including Chinese ones, are built and in a way that they are at one point incentivized to lie to you. So they give you a response, they say, this is it. I mean, I've seen it also personally, but it's good that there is a whole research now. Says, they give you something, this is it, it's not it. Whether you ask ChatGPT to fill in your Excel sheet with whatever data and it says, this is it, that's not it, to an answer that says, you say, give me information about this, here it is, it's not. So caveats and challenges and issues we warn about adoption of technology using, I mean, again, our technology, whether that's human science-based or not, is that if they use modern kind of LLM-based off-the-shelf solutions, there is always a caveat, as Kate said, that they are all built on mathematics alone. And it is an optimization and automation problem, correct? But these are not solutions that can tackle some of the things, and there's a lot of what you call edge cases or exceptional cases, which can, if you're a bank, for example, and you deny someone a credit or insurance, this person can, in theory, sue you. And that is, and you read some of this in newspapers, that's worth millions of bucks. So organizations should be careful about exceptional cases, which unfortunately or fortunately, a lot of LLMs now are bringing companies to. And that means that when they are very cautious, especially banking, I mean, financial sector, they're very cautious of adopting something that's not customized for them. This is where we go in, we say, yes, we have an LLM, for example, or yes, we have an AI model for your credit risk assessment or your insurance policy assessment, but this has been basically built using science. Again, as I said, what science, etc., we go through that. And then we educate them. This is the word, keyword, educate. I'm saying educate because behavioral sciences, etc., they got their break 40 years ago, but they are only mainstreaming now, like last 2-3 years. So data teams, risk teams, and I'm going to generalize across the world, not just in banking, but across the world, are not equipped with people who know anything about this. Behavioral science is not something you can pick up in a book. Behavioral science, unlike natural sciences, you have to know how to apply. If you don't, you cannot apply. There's a lot of psychology degree holders who have no idea how to use that in real world outside of academia. So our job is to go and say, look, if you're a data person, product person, risk person, whatever, in a big company, this is the solution, and you should know about this things. For example, I'll give you information about the person. If you're, let's say, a concrete example, you're assessing someone for a credit card, I'll give you this person's conscientiousness level assessment, or how open this person is, or how impulsive, because these are important things to measure someone's risk. And then if they say, how does that matter? Yes, this is how, because behavioral science, for example, psychology says that 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. So we educate them. We tell them that this is all great, but you have to know about this, because if you don't, you are liable as a company to lawsuits, to problems, to compliance risk, to regulatory risk. And as such, your company has to be aware and mitigate that. Yes. Brilliant. Thank you.
So closing comments in the last 10 minutes of our 5 minutes. So if I can get some closing comments on the impact of risk and how risk slows adoption down, and what are your considerations, your thought process when you go through planning your initiatives and coming up with all this great work. So Altaf, I'll start with you on how does all the things that Hayk highlighted to us impact what you end up saying we should do in the pace of adoption?
Yeah, I was just thinking, thank God I'm not in banking, finance, insurance. I think we get to experiment a lot as a CPG, right? And keeping aside the restricted and confidential data, right? Finance, R&D, just keep that aside. We've got consumer, commercial, supply chain, huge amount of data. The commercial consumer has a huge growth implication, and supply chain has a huge bottom line implication, right? So there's so much for us to play with. I think, so we've got our risk appetite is very high, right? In terms of being able to kind of go and do things. But just to kind of touch upon, in a slightly different way, right? Touching upon what Hayk said, and the whole hallucination and various other aspects. When we did the first use case, we're calling it decision intelligence, AI for BI. It took 4 months 4.5 months. So much so that people were like, is this really going to scale? If it's going to be so tedious, it's going to take so much time. Why? Because the accuracies were 60%, 70%, and the time to respond used to be 40 seconds, 1 minute. We're talking about the conversational capabilities, right, of leveraging GenAI. We moved to a fourth use case, which we were able to do it in 1 month, right? And the reason is there's a huge amount of learning that you develop. Metadata, how you want to configure how you're going to create the RAG, how you're going to build the context, how you're going to incorporate all of that into your platform, and how you take a platform approach to it. That can mitigate a risk in the long run. So I think it's important to experiment. Otherwise, you're not going to realize the potential of the technology.
So as the moderator, I do not want to be put in the naughty bucket. So can we limit your response to a minute? No, that's great. It's a great build on the risk and slowing down adoption, specifically from your point of view.
I got a pretty huge topic to talk about right now, actually.
Can we compress that variable to 1 minute?
Well, I will try to do that. I will try to do this definitely. So I'm looking at that thing from talent and professional perspective. So do you know what the vibe coding is actually that you have just mentioned? Just raise your hands if you know what is that. So pretty much it means that you can, without having any education, any prior knowledge, to click the button and say, I want to execute this specific algorithm, and that you will have some metrics and like accuracy, etc. So part of the work that I'm doing with the universities is actually supervising technically the students in the master's and PhD degrees. And what I can see dramatically is that all the time when I'm asking a question, a student on the technical degree, do you know how that model is working? Do you know what the mathematical properties it has in order to deliver this result? The answer is no. So pretty much in the universities right now, we teach the future data scientists, the people that are going to execute the algorithms and develop them, how to call a function that has been developed 20 years ago, but we're not teaching them how it is actually working. So pretty much to give you a metaphor how it is going to be in 10 years, if you would go to the doctor to have a vaccine injection, the doctor can only inject the vaccine, but if you ask a doctor, how is that working? What are the consequences on my body? Will I die after this? The answer will be, I have no idea. So I guess you got my point in here.
So I think one of the panelists downstairs made the point that the AI tools reflects the skills of the user. I would say it also amplifies it inversely. So there's a challenge coming in the future when we use these things but don't actually know how to use them. So final remarks, if we can cap it to 30 seconds.
I'll try and do this in
I'm trying
a minute, come on.
Try and be brave.
So the risks are huge, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that they're not, but I do believe that people don't recognize that you can limit the risks if you limit the scale of the deployment of the tools which are available. One of the things that I've been doing quite a lot over the last 2 years is a very simple business process, but it's incredibly flexible. The idea is that you use a form, and we choose to use Typeform. You create a Typeform to ask people details about something that you can then incorporate into a dynamic prompt that you can then use an LLM to generate a something. And the reason this is very cool is that firstly, you can actually inject some context into the prompt that's actually constrains what it is that you're trying to get out of it. But it also means that people don't need to learn to be a prompt engineer. They can learn, or they can impart the wisdom about their particular area of vertical expertise or knowledge, and that can be amalgamated into something that produces a useful outcome. It's a step ahead of just giving them a chat interface and asking them to use it. And I think that, in terms of thinking, is an approach that I would recommend. So it limits the risk. And it also uses these phenomenal tools to do something very much more specific that has real utility. And inside a business process, this works pretty well. If you look in this book, which is in your bag, there's a little QR code at the back, and you can try one of these things, and I hope it works.
Brilliant. So my key takeaway is don't work in regulated industries. That's really hard. Do not do that. And then what I've sort of taken away is the idea of combining domain expertise with general purpose technologies. So the LLMs are general purpose tools still. They're like Excel spreadsheets. You can be really powerful or dangerous with them regardless of depending on how you use it. And then I think the key risk you've highlighted, which I feel in my line of business and the things we do, is this erosion of skills over time, which for me is like, how do I compensate for that? That's my key takeaways, if that makes sense.
I have 5 seconds.
You have? Well, you started the conversation if you don't remember.
No, I mean, look, I think I completely agree with Rod, by the way. Experiment small, and I'm going to also say exactly what Altaf says. Just try to think from point of view of value. As Altaf says, experiment small. And like Kate says, it's like piggying on everyone, be aware. I mean, you don't have to know how the car works to drive a car, sure, but you have to know basic principles. So there's a limit of how much you should know. My only advice is just kind of educate yourself. Don't think this, whatever AI shiny new news comes, that just jump on it. Just be aware. Try to educate yourself. Think at the end of the day, it's for human beings. Has to have some human basis, right? And I'm saying this, and sorry, I'm not self-promoting, but I ended up now, I'm drafting a book called From Artificial to Natural Intelligence, simply because there's a lot of people saying, "Hi, can you like write this down somewhere?" And there's like a book. So I'm literally drafting a book about this, how to connect this to things. I don't have a book yet, but eventually. Thanks.
Brilliant. I work on commission. Come and see me afterwards. Can I open? Do we have time for questions? 5 minutes for questions, if that's okay. So be very lenient. Thank you very much, because I'm sure we're 20 minutes into that 5 minutes now. I don't know where to start. I saw you first. Sorry, but lady with the black. Yeah, right in front. Just here. There's another one. There's another one. Sorry, black's very common color. Please, question.
Well, I've got the microphone, so I'm going to go. Thank you. That was really helpful. I do work in a regulated industry, so I am damned. But this was very helpful in understanding that. My question's for Kate. Kate, you mentioned around the kind of, you didn't put it this way, but the kind of the woolliness of thinking around the articulated problem statements. What's the best articulated problem statement that you've ever heard that you've been able to work on? Because it would be good to have an example of what that looks like. Thank you.
Yeah. That's my answer. So honestly, what I'm doing with my business side, all the time when I'm having a project, I have a list of the questions that every single business partner has to answer. So it is not like, this is not kind of the, you have to do this like in the way that I want you to do this. It is more a partnership in this sense, when we are actually working together, business and tech. So I cannot assume you know what the requirements are going to be in there, right? And you cannot really understand what is happening in there. We have like totally different expertise levels in there. So all the time, if you will come to me, that we're going to have a 2 weeks sessions with you, what is actually going on in the data science world, this will help you to understand if that actually what you want to perceive in the end. Maybe that's not actually data science at all. Maybe that's data analytics. Maybe you want to have a dashboard or something like that. That sounds, sometimes confusing in there. So, and then after these 2 sessions, I will give you the 10 questions. What do you have to look at before we go to any POC stage, before we will start gathering any data for you? Yeah, so it's, that's not comes from business. It comes from our collaboration from both of us. And also what you need to remember, every single use case is a pretty unique one. It's like you're all the time reinventing a car, like from the scratch. And therefore you need these guiding questions, like these milestones, in order to better understand. It's like the same, I love to talk about the medical stuff. It's like the same when you go to the doctor, to the GP. They're going to ask you a lot of questions in order to understand what is the problem, because you might feel that, oh, my arm is hurting, but actually it's being in there from the impulses from the totally different part of your body. And we're not going to treat your arm, we're going to treat the different part of your body. The same is happening with the technical projects.
Just one sentence to that. I know you didn't ask me, but I think one way to look at it, sorry, yeah, I like to talk. Yeah, no. No, one way to look at it also from my point is think if that problem statement, if a third-party independent agency or person can adjudicate or evaluate it in some way. So if there is clear, let's say, KPI or parameter that can be inferred by independent person who just never seen this, looks at the problem statement, says, oh, this means this, then it's a well-formulated statement. Because if a third party can do it, it's quantifiable or evaluatable, so to speak, then it's well-formulated, clear to test or measure. Thanks.
We already have a microphone in front, sorry.
Sure, that's right.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yep. Yeah. Great. Kate, I think one of the first things that you said was music to my ears. I think any one of us who's more on the technical side will agree that when we talk about AI, we don't nearly talk about data enough. And I think, currently very excitedly working with an enterprise software startup that exactly works on that data plumbing issue. Happy to talk with anyone about that afterwards. But my question is, I think in this current state, when, business leaders, decision makers are so focused on Gen AI as the buzzword or how to implement our AI strategy, any flavor of that statement, how do you get the data piece to cut through? I'm curious if you find any resistance or how to kind of bridge some of that understanding. And I would be happy to hear from any of the panelists.
So again, so pretty much what you're trying to do, any technical stuff, it means it comes down to one thing. You want to optimize something. Yeah, it doesn't matter what is the AI strategy, like what is happening in the business side. You want to optimize one little thing for some reason. And the solution is pretty simple regarding the data. You cannot optimize that unless you have a data, right? So it's pretty, I think this statement is pretty popular. Garbage in, garbage out. If you will take garbage data into any fancy algorithm, it doesn't really matter. Gen AI, deep learning, machine learning, you will have the same result outside on the other side of the pipeline. So it's not about convincing to have a data, it's about understanding. Yeah, that is like, it's about like artificial intelligence maturity kind of level to understand that 12 Excel samples will not help you to do whatever you want to do in there. And we need to focus to really get the data, and that you will receive your results. But for that, we have to work together. And it's pretty tedious work actually to get the data that you want. And all of us, business and tech, all of us, we have to go through this painful process to get it in order to receive your results.
Peter, I can
Question, sorry, go on.
just
and then Sebastian at the end. I think then we're going to completely get slaughtered if we go over that.
Yeah, I'm inspired by Hayk. So one thing that I think I would say we are fortunate in PepsiCo, but equally we spent a lot of money on it, is to create a data foundation. Again, I spoke about before restructuring, we had sector lakes, data lakes, we had pools, puddles, you had data all over the place. We've taken a very clear decision to say, we're going to build data foundation. We're going to call it operational necessity. We're going to make sure that 90% of the enterprise data is in the data foundation, and we're going to invest in making that happen. So I think there's a very strong top-down required with deep pockets to be able to drive that sort of a vision. Otherwise, you have a fragmented landscape to deal with.
I'm receiving death threats out of the corner there, so I encourage you to please speak to the panelists. They're amazing. They have a lot of detail we can't get into here. Please hijack them, talk to them, take them for a coffee, whatever you feel you need to do to convince them. They're amazing to speak to. We have to unfortunately wrap it up, if that's okay.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.